Marlene Cohen. I'm a member of the board of Machar, the Washington Congregation for Secular Humanistic Judaism, and I've been involved for 30 years, and I know that because my kid is 30 years old, and I was carrying him around hoping I could find something Jewish that I could tolerate, and I found this. So I'm really happy to be here today to introduce Paul Cohen, who is the executive director of the Society for Humanistic Judaism. And that's a role he's had for only a year and a half. And yet before that, Paul spent a lot of time, almost 2 decades, helping Jewish organizations and movements better understand the key trends affecting North American Jewry, including intermarriage, engagement, disaffiliation, and inclusion. Paul's writings have appeared in the Jewish Forward, the New York Jewish Week, the Tablet, and elsewhere. He's co-authored the books, a couple books. One, 20 Things for Grandparents of Interfaith Grandchildren to Do and Not Do to Nurture Jewish Identity in Their Grandchildren, and How to Raise Jewish Children Even When You're Not Jewish Yourself. So you get a sense that where he's coming from. Paul previously served as the Associate Executive Director of Big Tent Judaism, or the Jewish Outreach Institute, where he helped pioneer and refine effective engagement techniques. And I remember us at Machar being really excited to see Big Tent Judaism in a way that we could connect to these other, we thought, more traditional folks. So pretty cool that now he's here. Paul is a white Ashkenazi, half of a Japanese, which is Jewish and Japanese, Jewish multiracial household. He maintains the Japanese page on Facebook, and you should check it out because it has a great balanced circle that is half a salmon sushi and half a bagel with lox and cream cheese. It's just lovely. Very clever. So I think you'll enjoy hearing Paul talk, and feel free to ask any questions you wish. Thank you for being here, Paul.
Hi, everybody. So I will do my best to share with you what I've been working on and what I've been thinking about as it relates to the future of liberal Judaism, and then we'll be sure to have a good, intimate conversation. The first thing I want to tell you is the talk, which is called The Future of Liberal Judaism, is mostly going to be about the present of liberal Judaism. So you've been duped a little bit, but if it makes you feel better, just getting the organized Jewish community into the present would be like helping them move into the future. So, sorry, that was a slight mess up. So, who's done this? Who knows what this is and has done this?
Virtual reality.
Has everyone tried this? Has anyone tried it? Who's tried it? You haven't tried it yet, Jeremy?
Like 25-year-old technology, yes.
Okay, you gotta try it. So what happens in virtual reality? Your senses, two of your key senses are overtaken. Your auditory and visual senses you are transported to another place. And it feels pretty real now. This one is called, I think, the Oculus Rift. It's commercially available, and it's becoming more popular. And in 5 years from now, you'll have something like this, or you'll have something in between called augmented reality. And why do I bring this up? Because as we move forward into the future, there will be even more flexibility than today in terms of doing whatever you want to do, being whatever you want to be, because you will have limitless decisions. And, you know, there was the joke in the 90s, I think, that on the internet nobody knows you're a dog, and it was like a dog and a keyboard. But in virtual reality, you could actually be a dog, and people will know that. But the potential is limitless. And the reality is that the future is already here. So this is a quote from the Pew Research Center, not about Jews, just about Americans in general. Half of American adults have changed religious affiliations at least once in their lives. And if we apply this to the Jewish community, and we don't say religions, but we say denominations, that's something that the Pew Survey and others have found, is that half or more of American Jews have changed the denominations if they were born into Judaism than what they are now. And for those of you who were born into Judaism, how many of you are the denomination today that you were born into? Anybody? You were born into humanistic Judaism.
Well, I was born into a
Secular.
yeah.
Yes,
But
great.
they sent me to a conservative Sunday school.
Okay, awesome. So, right, and of course, we've got, our movement has been around over 50 years, and we are now into the third generation of folks who grew up, and of course, the secular movement has been around even longer. But you can see that that's the minority, and most Jews have switched denominations. Pew considered Catholicism and Protestantism separate religions, and so between that and Judaism and the other religions, people have a choice. And what does that mean if you've got a choice to Judaism? How does Judaism compete? And we have been competing in the marketplace of ideas for a long time now. So every year or so, the New York Times has another article about people who are not Jewish at all, like neither spouse, but they're taking on Jewish rituals. So the one on the left was an article about, in Manhattan, people move apartments every couple of years. Why leave the mezuzah up if you're not Jewish at all? They interviewed all these people. The one in front of it is Christians who are getting a ketubah. Again, neither spouse is Jewish, but they see the ritual. There's been articles about bar mitzvahs that people want to have for their kids, even though neither spouse is Jewish. And likewise, the wedding canopy is something that people have been trying to do. And of course, Madonna in the 90s said she was a Kabbalist. And, I was excited about it because I like Madonna, but the Jewish community, I don't think, knew what to do with that. First of all, certainly, the Kabbalah Center was considered a cult and not a part of the organized Jewish community. But even at that time, I felt like it seems like this is an opportunity, and instead there was really this concern about, what it says about us in a negative way, when, to me, there was a real positive there that she was finding something of meaning. So what's happening today, and that I think is going to accelerate into the future, and I've got an asterisk here that says, not for everybody, just for half of us or more. So Jewish ethnicity or tribalism is declining, and we can talk a bit more about this, and I'll tell you how that's happening in my own household, but I presume many of you are experiencing that as well. Fixed Jewish denominational identities or joiners is declining, and we're seeing that, and we saw it in the Pew survey, and we saw it a couple of weeks ago when the study of the Jewish community here in DC came out. Jewish religiosity is on the decline, or actually, perhaps a better way to describe it is it's moving to opposite poles, where folks who are religious are becoming even more religious, and their religiosity is deepening, but for most others, Jewish religiosity is declining. And with it, this notion of Jewish obligation. By that, what I mean is the notion that you have to do anything at all because you're Jewish. And intermarriage accelerates this change. So, if you've got two or more heritages in your household, the notion that you need to do anything for one of them is immediately in competition with the other. And you are now asking yourself, well, do I need to give up one in order to do the other? Does that one tribe, I don't even need to put the word tribe in quotes, of course, because the Jewish community often refers to itself as a tribe. Do I need to put one ahead of the other? If I've got access to multiple religious narratives, doesn't that call all of them into question? They're each claiming that they're right. And the case for particularism over universalism is harder to make. And this is something that could be a topic all of its own, is the Jewish relationship to the universal and the particular. It comes out, for example, when people talk about tzedakah. Is donating to the ACLU tzedakah in the same way as donating to your local federation? And shouldn't you give to Jewish causes first? That kind of argument gets harder to make. And that's just about charity, but it relates to how you spend your time as well. So here's where we are as of 5 years ago when the Pew survey studied it. There are more intermarried households in America today than there are in-married. And what I mean by intermarried is somebody who's Jewish married to somebody who is not Jewish. If the person converts to Judaism, that's an in-married household. So Pew did not say how many households total, but I extrapolated that from the Pew survey, and Alan Cooperman, who oversaw the Pew study, didn't disagree with my methodology. So he wouldn't confirm it, he didn't want to attach numbers to it, but he said the methodology was right. And what will happen is this Pac-Man here is going to keep eating. The intermarried numbers are going to continue to grow because the rate of intermarriage is over 50%. And this has been the confusion in the Jewish community for decades. We've been hearing about a 50% intermarriage rate. The thing is, there's two rates, the individual and the couple rate. So without making you do too much math, I will try to explain this briefly. If you've got a 50% individual intermarriage rate, and you've only got 4 Jews, 50%, right? Who wants to do 50% of 4? Anyone? Courageous? 2. The in-married Jews marry each other. The intermarried Jews marry someone who's not Jewish. So a 50% individual rate means you have 1 Jewish household created to 2 intermarried households created. So that's a 66% couples rate that emerges from a 50% intermarriage rate, right? It's confusing, and the only thing we hear in the Jewish community is there's a 50% rate of intermarriage. We've heard that for over 30 years because it's been over 30 years. And nobody talks about what has resulted from that. And what has resulted from that is that the intermarried are the majority. You don't feel it in the organized Jewish community because they don't participate at nearly the same levels. So their voices are not heard in the Jewish community, but they're actually the majority. And if the Jewish community were thinking about who should be serving and how, certainly this is something to consider. And locally, the study that just came out actually found a lower than national average household rate. This was the household rate of 53%. So it's still a Pac-Man for the intermarried, but it's slightly wider mouth. But it will continue to chomp because of the individual rate of intermarriage. So in DC, greater DC, you've got more intermarried households than in-married households. So these trends are accelerating. So this was taken during my own intermarriage, and for many, many years working in the Jewish community, and prior to that growing up in the Jewish community, the word that I heard applied most to this is crisis. This was a crisis for the Jewish people. Anyone not know who this is? Tradition. So, Fiddler on the Roof is probably, outside of the Bible, the most well-known piece of Jewish intellectual property of all time. You can YouTube Fiddler on the Roof and in any language you can imagine, and you will find a performance of it, including Japanese, of course. And so, what was the moral of this story? And this movie came out in '64, so I feel like I don't need to say spoiler alert, right? He has 5 daughters, which is like a curse back then because you have to pay the dowry and you have to pay for the wedding. And so he feels like he's cursed, and each of his daughters transgresses traditional Judaism in one way or another. And he goes back and forth about on the one hand, on the other hand, and then finally his 5th daughter intermarries, and there is no other hand, and she is cut out of the family. And when this came out, it was nostalgic already, because that wasn't happening. That's not how families were dealing with it even then, for the most part. Some were sitting Shiva, in other words, mourning the intermarried family member as if they had died. But most at that point were not, because this was right around, the movie came out in '74. So by '74, but even when the play came out in mid-60s, that's right when the intermarriage rate began to spike. And why did the intermarriage rate, which had held steady at around 6% for the 20th century, suddenly spike in the 60s? Anyone have a sense of what was happening in the 1960s in America, or really lots of places around the world? things were changing dramatically, and the Jewish community was very impacted by that. And the biggest change was that the rest of America no longer considered it a tragedy if their children married a Jew. So, as much as the Jewish community is so focused on itself about what a tragedy it would be for their children to marry someone who's not Jewish, that's not what was preventing intermarriage. We were at most 5% of the population. It was the 95% who didn't want their kids to marry Jews. That changed for a lot of reasons. Civil rights movement was a big piece of it. The removal of things like quotas of how many Jews could attend Ivy League schools or where Jews can live. These were actual discriminatory policies that existed up until that time. When those things started to fall away and Jews had total mobility, they began meeting and falling in love with people that were always around them. And yet, here's what we still see as of less than 2 years ago in the Jewish communal media. Which of our grandchildren will be Jewish in this age of intermarriage? It's a constant worry by the organized Jewish community, and that worry is not shared by a growing number of Jews, and that disconnect is keeping people, in part, from participating in the organized Jewish community. And by the way, this is, to me, one of the most disingenuous moving of the goalposts of all time, because 30 years ago it was, will your children be Jewish if you intermarry? And as you're about to see, the answer now is probably. And so they moved the goalposts to grandchildren, right? So it's not an intermarriage crisis, because the Pew study found 6.7 million Jews in the United States, the most in US history. So this narrative of decline has not been verified by the numbers. In fact, we're growing, and Pew said it's because, in part, the intermarried are raising their kids as Jewish. And what's the knock? But what kind of Jews are they? The worst thing that Jews can do to each other is say, you're not Jewish enough. So, this was my wedding ketubah, and it is in Hebrew, Japanese, and English, which, but because both partners are not Jewish, the Orthodox and parts, I think, of the conservative community would say, not kosher. This was our chuppah, not kosher. This was our challah ceremony. The challah might have been kosher. So that, I'm just going to put a probably on. That was the one thing that might have been kosher. These are my in-laws being lifted up during our hora. So my wife probably doesn't appreciate this, but her dress was not the most expensive in the room for our wedding. It was my mother-in-law's $10,000 kimono. And they did the whole hora, of course, not a real hora, not really Jews. And the whole purpose of my speaking today was to share a photo of my kids. And these are them, and of course, not really Jewish. Now, again, this is not the view of most Jews in America, and I feel blessed, actually, for the work that has been done, particularly by the Reform movement, which is now the largest denomination, to accommodate intermarriage in many ways. So, in 1983, they said that you can be Jewish if your father is Jewish and your mother isn't, which was overturning 2,000 years of Jewish tradition. And that made a big difference, and it didn't happen anywhere else in the world. And so now you've got communities in Canada, Australia, South Africa, that are experiencing the same growth in intermarriage that we experienced in the 80s and 90s, and they have no capacity to really deal with it because they don't have a robust, liberal, Jewish denominational world there. And they're losing people because of it. And you know, our country has provided room for folks to call themselves Jewish if they are patrilineal or matrilineal descended. Here's what Pew found. As far as raising children in intermarriages, 61% of the intermarried are raising their children with a Jewish identity. So if some of the naysayers in the Jewish community were here, they would say that I was very careful about my wording to say raise children with a Jewish identity, because the naysayers see only this 20%, Jewish by religion. And in fact, at the same time as your local study came out, there was a local study in the San Francisco Bay Area, And when they got to this pie chart, they said something along the lines of only 20% of the intermarried are raising their children fully Jewish. They used the word fully Jewish. They didn't use that word when they were asking the questions of the survey takers, but they made the judgment fully Jewish. When I see a lot more to this pie. Now, the Pew pie looks different than the one that the Jewish community used here for your local study. But what's happening here is, for many years now, when measuring Jews in America, they use a two-step process. They call people at random and say, "What's your religion?" And when they say, "I have no religion," the next question is, do you consider yourself Jewish or have Jewish parentage? And if they say yes on the first question, they don't ask the second question, obviously, and they count you as Jewish by religion. If you say no, but you are Jewish based on these other criteria, they say Jewish not by religion is the way some surveys do it, or they say culturally Jewish, and so on. So it's been this two-step process for many years, and the ironic thing is, if I wasn't called by Pew, but if Pew had called me and said, "Are you Jewish by religion?" I would have said yes, even though I'm an atheist, because I know what they're getting at. And I would hope that they would then ask me, what do I believe? But I get it. And by the way, I'm here, I work for secular humanistic Judaism, which is a non-theistic religion. So let's just table that for now. So I'm Jewish by even non-theistic religion too. To me, there's potential in all pieces of this pie, but there's certainly lots of potential and lots to celebrate in the fact that so many interfaith families are raising their kids with some Jewish identity. This is exactly the opposite of what we were told for years and years was going to happen because of intermarriage. And not only that, it would be so much easier in American society not to bother. And these folks are going out of their way to help bring some form of Jewish identity to their kids. Here's the numbers for DC, which was way higher. DC found 75% of the pie having some kind of Jewish identity. 19% Jewish by religion, and then they broke it down: secular, culturally Jewish, 42%, Jewish in another religion, 14%, another religion, only 1% in the DC study, and that seems wrong to me, but okay. And then no religion or not yet decided. So to me, that's really phenomenal, and what's the result of this? Here's the flip side, so that's how parents raise their kids. Here's how kids identify themselves. They're not kids anymore. This goes from age 18 and up. And you can see that Jews by religion, this is for all people who self-identify as Jewish in these age cohorts. This is for the adult children of intermarriage. So those over 65, very few adult children of intermarriage over age 65, consider themselves Jewish at all. And that declines. And then those who consider themselves either Jewish by religion or Jews of no religion, by age 18 to 29, is almost 60%. And this is exactly the opposite of what was predicted would happen. So it's not an intermarriage crisis, it's an institutional crisis. Because only 69% of American Jews identify with a denomination. Now that doesn't sound like such a terrible number until you compare it to when they asked in years past. It's dramatically lower than it used to be. And then, as far as who's currently affiliated with a synagogue, it's 33%. In many communities, it's lower. And who attend synagogue at least monthly, it's 23%. This is from a study that found 10% were Orthodox. So you can almost say all 10% of the Orthodox attend synagogue at least monthly. So that means 13% of 90%. Who knew that in there? It's also an institutional crisis because when asked what is essential to being Jewish, some of the top answers, the top answer in the Pew study was remembering the Holocaust. Leading an ethical and moral life was up there, which is, I guess, a good thing. Working for justice and equality. Way down toward the bottom, being part of a Jewish community. Only 20% of all Jews, again, including the 10% who identified as Orthodox, say being part of a Jewish community is essential to being Jewish. And for those of us who care about Jewish community, to me, this should be the most troubling number from any survey we do of Jews. Secularity is also increasing, and this is something that I can understand why, for many people in the organized Jewish community, is something to worry about, not me, but Jews are almost the flip side of Americans as far as their belief in a God/universal spirit. You've got, of those who are absolutely certain that there's a God, 34% of all Jews, compared to 69% of all Americans. That's a dramatic difference. And likewise, those who will say to a stranger on a phone, I don't believe in God, of all Jews, 28% compared to only 9% of all US adults. And this is not new. This is not news. This has been happening for many, many years. And to me, I think there's an opportunity to open up the conversation in the Jewish community around belief and around God. And I think the reason why it doesn't happen is because many people in Reform and conservative communities would be upset to learn that their rabbi doesn't believe in a God that answers personal prayers. Or they might say, oh, that's good because I don't either, but then what are we doing here? You know, why are we praying if we don't think anyone is listening? Now, I actually think there's an answer for that, but it's never pitched that way. It's never explained that. We're praying because of what it does for us, not because of the change it's going to make in the universe. But Judaism is not sold that way right now. And of course, Jews of no religion is on the rise because it's related to secularity, because it's the people who answer no to the question, are you Jewish? And then, well, yeah, my dad is Jewish. And why do they do that? No one has done a deep dive on why they do that. But I've met people who, when I tell them that I work in the Jewish community, have said to me, yeah, my dad is Jewish, right? And what are they not saying when they say that? But I'm not really Jewish. Because somebody has told them somewhere along the line that if your mom isn't Jewish, then you're not really Jewish. And they have absorbed that, and they don't want to claim it for themselves. And to me, this opens up all kinds of conversations. But you can see the trajectory here, 32% of millennials who have some kind of Jewish identity, some cultural identity, some Jewish ancestry or parentage, say no to the question of, do you have a religion? By the way, they don't say yes, I'm Christian. They would not be included among Jews of no religion. So, what is our agenda? Do we want to make folks like that more like us, or should we acknowledge that the Jewish community, is changed forever? So I will talk a little bit about the future. Here are some things I think we can do. I think there's a lot that we can do, so I'll just throw some of them at you. Celebrate diversity. What if we say intermarriage is good, period, and then just shut up, right? And not say but. Intermarriage is good because it means two people found each other and fell in love and love each other. And that's great. And it's great when two Jewish people fall in love. And it's great when two guys fall in love. And it's great if you don't want to be in love and you just want to be alone. It's all good. Let's leave it at that. What would happen? We already see that even with all the negative messages, the Jews still want to share some of their background with their kids. But those folks don't want to be a part of the organized Jewish community. And to me, the messaging is a big piece of it, and there needs to be an internal conversation in the organized Jewish community about how do we get past this. And it will be very difficult because you're always going to have those voices who are saying that this is a Jewish value, that in marriage is a Jewish value. And it's not anymore if the value is based on what the Jews are doing. So I think that there's not enough of a conversation. There are many right ways to be Jewish. And also this notion of tribalism is voluntary and transient. So we have at least, I think, 3 people here who are gonna go at 4:30 and plant ourselves in front of a TV screen to watch a Michigan basketball game because we are in the tribe of Michigan alumni. And that was a tribe that we kind of volunteered into. I had no idea what I was getting into, but I spend way more time in the tribe of Michigan sports fan than I do in the tribe of Jewish service attending. So you know, it's a huge part of my identity, as is being a father, you know, as is being a Jewish communal professional. We can do all of these things at the same time. And the notion that tribalism in the Jewish community is biologically based is a huge barrier for lots of folks that I think in the future we will get over. Because when you think about that virtual reality, I mean, there are billions of dollars being poured into virtual reality now by all the top tech companies because they believe it's the next platform, the way I'm using Windows here still, or you're using iOS or Android. You've got like 3 or 4 platforms, and all of technology feels that either augmented reality, which means you can still see out, but you see stuff that no one else is seeing, or virtual reality is the next platform. And again, when you can do any of it, why would you do any of it? Why would you do Jewish? And that was part of what we were talking about this morning in Mahar. What would we bring with us? It's all going to be voluntary. It all has to have meaning and value to people, or else they're not going to do it. One thing that I'm really proud of, being a part of a movement that defines who is a Jew in the most inclusive way possible. So in 1988, the International Federation for Secular and Humanistic Judaism declared a Jew is a person of Jewish descent, or any person who declares him or herself to be a Jew, and who identifies with the history, ethical values, culture, civilization, community, and fate of the Jewish people. There's a quote that has been attributed to David Ben-Gurion, Israel's first prime minister, that he considers as Jewish anybody who is mashug enough to call themselves Jewish. Mashug is Yiddish for crazy. So that's my definition too. If someone says to me that they're Jewish, I say, okay. And the nice thing about humanistic Judaism is there's no ritual that they can't participate in. There's no activity that is reserved only for the Jews because it's holy and God is listening. It is available to anybody who's going to find meaning from it because it's cultural in nature, even though it's also ritual, even though it's also lighting Hanukkah candles, for example, or saying a blessing. Some of our communities don't want to use the word blessing. What do they say instead of blessing?
Blessing.
Affirmation.
Affirmation. So in this community, I think we're okay with the word blessing. There's a lot of, we're still working it out, but we still say stuff. But we say words that we believe. It's the ritual that connects us to the history and the meaning, or hopefully we'll try to. So to me, this leaves things wide open, and I think in the future, this will be the definition that more of the Jewish community will use, because it's just logic. It's just logic. Why do we, you know, I grew up in the conservative movement. I understand the notion of if you're going to have a minyan, and you need 10 Jews, or in the community I grew up in, 10 men, then that's okay. So even in those communities where I might want them to overturn that, I understand they don't want to overturn that, I would still ask them, outside of those ritual needs that you believe in, what other barriers are you putting up that are cultural barriers? That's a religious barrier, I get it. There's lots of cultural barriers about who could be a member, who can stand on the bima. For the most part, they're finally over who can stand on the bima. I knew a wonderful woman who worked briefly in the organized Jewish community. Her dad was Asian, so she was halakhically Jewish by Jewish law, because her mom was Jewish. She grew up in a conservative synagogue in Long Island, and on the day of her bat mitzvah, the rabbi told her that her dad would not be standing up on the bima because it would set a bad example. And guess what? She has nothing to do with the Jewish community today. She's 30-something and has a child. And this is a fairly common story, and it's really sad. And ultimately, what most Jews, I think, would be okay accepting is you care about it passionately, you want in, you're in. We have the highest barriers to get in, and those of you who are men know that one of those barriers involves blood from a very sensitive part of your body. Another thing I would say is to think about meaning over identity. So what's identity? This thing, this Jewish identity that we think are in our genes, right? And 98% of American Jews were born into Judaism. And that's something that the Jewish community has been trying to strengthen for decades, we're going to strengthen Jewish identity. That's the standard line in any grant proposal. And here's how we measure it, that they're even more Jewish after going to Jewish day school. And what's the ultimate measure? Of course, who they marry, because this is based on this fear of intermarriage. So what I would say is, let's forget about identity. I'm not gonna look for people's passports, their Jewish passports, on the way into my community. I'm gonna ask, what does it do for you? How can we make this work for you? How about being part of a Jewish community, right? Most Jews, regardless of how they stand, are still lighting Hanukkah candles, are still going to Passover Seders. Why? Because you don't need an organized Jewish community to do those things. It's when you need the community that they're not participating. And to me, the way to get at meaning is to answer these questions of how does it improve my life, or how does it improve my family's lives, or how does it make the world a better place? So that's partially selfish and partially altruistic, but I think it's how people think. And we need to articulate the answers. We can't imply it anymore. We can't presume that Jews already know the answers, that they are under obligation to fulfill Judaism to get those answers. We need to help provide some of those answers. And the third thing I want to suggest is the notion of uncoupling wisdom from religion. So this morning's session was about not throwing out the baby with the bathwater. And what's the baby? And the baby is that we've got a 3,000-year tradition that does have some amazing wisdom in it. And it would be a waste of energy to recreate the wheel, to rebuild the wheel when it's in there. But how do we pull it out for people without making them sit through, 3.5 hour Saturday morning services in a language that they don't understand, when that's the reason why they left? And I'll give you an example. There was a lovely book called Maimonides' Ladder, and it's about the notion of how to give charity based on steps that Maimonides laid out about what's the best way to give charity. And the best way is to help somebody be able to take care of themselves. But then it goes down from there. I love that. I think the next one up is anonymous in a way that neither the giver nor the receiver knows who each other is. It's not the second from the top, it's way up there, and I love that. I don't know who the vendors are, I'm sure they're lovely, but I'm inevitably talking about this in a building named for somebody, but that's okay. We skip that in the Jewish community, we put our names on stuff, that's cool, but what's the Jewish value? The Jewish value is anonymous. If anybody watches the Larry David show, it was a whole episode about that. Did you see that? Where he donated as anonymous and everyone was fawning all over Ted Danzig because they knew he'd given. So. And so if we're sharing Jewish wisdom, and there's lots of organizations now that are on this and understand this and are doing it, how do you make it accessible to anyone who might benefit, regardless of their identity of being Jewish or not? Because if it's meaning and valuable, why would we want to keep it just to ourselves? So it kind of goes back to, everything goes back to Madonna for me. And then how is it curated? Who is going to be the ones to curate that? And what is our mission as Jews, as a Jewish community? What's the purpose of all of this? And I can't answer that, but I think it's the question we need to be answering. So thank you for letting me throw all of that out at you, and I'd love to have a Q&A if you have any questions that I raise. Thank you.
There's a lot of us in the Jewish community that have been arguing with the poll takers to stop asking the question, as you were outlining, about religion, because it put those of us that consider ourselves secular humanists in an odd spot, because they were defining religion as were you Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, and then later Reconstruction or whatever else. We keep failing, even though it's obvious from some of the other subheadings that you did that they're very aware that there are secular people out there who identify as Jewish. Have you found that there's going to be a major change in how Pew and others, Pew's not the only one doing these surveys, I know, but they're such leaders in it for good reasons.
And look, Pew drew on the National Jewish Population Surveys that had come before it in their methodology, and then they switched it up using their own methodology as well. One of the things that the Pew Institute is very interested in is the rise of the nuns, not N-U-N-S, N-O-N-E-S, the nuns, the people who say I have no religion. And so the Pew Survey of American Jews fit into their larger worldview of there's a rise of people who say nuns, and they found that among Jews as well. So that's another kind of lesson for the Jewish community, is that we're just like everybody else. We hate to say that, but we are. But as far as finding secular humanistic Jews, the challenge is we're a denomination, and we're the smallest denomination. So there are lots of secular Jews, and they are finding that, and you can see it in the numbers. But those folks are not saying, I'm a secular humanistic Jew, capital initials, because they haven't heard it from us yet. So that's my job, right? That's what I'm trying to do, is to get more people to recognize that what we're doing aligns with what they already believe. And I think that for many people in our movement, their experience was similar to mine, which is once I understood it, I said, oh, okay, that describes, this is my most common thing when I explain what I'm doing to people who are Jewish. I say, yeah, I guess that describes what I believe. I've never heard of you guys before. So it's, like, the first part is great, and then the second part is I want to strangle them because we've been around for 50 years. But to me, that's on us. You know, that is our work, is to let people know. And we're also saddled by, or blessed, by the model of denomination and congregation. Those models aren't working for anybody anymore in the liberal communities. And not just the Jewish liberal religious communities. It's not working. People don't want to affiliate in that way. They don't want to be members in that way. And we've got to flip it. So one way that I want to flip us is, as a movement, we have to get back to advocacy and speaking out on what we believe, and also as a cause to represent people who feel the way we do, who think that their voices are not heard by the organized Jewish community. Because they're not. Because how many Federation events or events here at the JCC, like how many Hanukkah events happen in this building where they light the menorahs with the traditional blessing, and then they say, and now let's do the humanistic version, right? Never. Unless maybe we need to sponsor it, and then they will, right? So that's a way to get in front of people and say, look, here's an alternative. Yes, ma'am.
I know a number of Jews who consider themselves agnostics or atheists, but prefer to be in a traditional congregation, whether it's Reform, Conservative, Orthodox. They like the structure, they like the familiar prayers, and it's something that they grew up with. And some of them have even told me, oh, our rabbi, we're not sure he's a believer either, and it's very acceptable to question within their congregations, which I think is probably something unique to Judaism that you don't find so much in like Christianity and Islam. And so I'm just kind of wondering, so what do you say to those people? There are lots of people who say that, yes, they're secular, but they want to stay in their traditional congregation. So how does this movement work better with them?
So that's obviously something that I'm very aware of, and we've got a program at SHJ called Independent Membership, which is, so we're the only denomination that you can affiliate with without living in proximity to a congregation. You can just sign up on our website and become an independent member. And we have independent members who are involved in other theistic congregations, and they are members of us because they like our angle on things, and they want to support us as a cause. And that's why I feel like, at least for SHJ as the umbrella organization, if congregationalism is working, I don't want to break what's working. But for SHJ, I think it's an additional parallel track to say, go ahead, keep doing what you're doing in the Reform movement if it's providing meaning for you, but at the same time, you can also supplement it with what we're putting out intellectually and so on from our movement. So that's one path. And the other thing is, those folks that you're describing is still, like in this community, it's something like 25% of all Jews are affiliates. We're talking, nationally, the majority of Jews are not what you were describing. So to me, the target population is actually both, right? The folks who resonate with humanism, and that's another piece, which is that a lot of people don't know what humanism is. So we talk about that as well. People say, oh, I guess I am a humanist. Oh, and I'm Jewish. Let me see how this relates. The American Humanist Association has grown in size over the past 10 years. That's an organization that is growing because they are a cause. They're just a flat-out cause. They have local chapters that form community, but they come at it from the cause down, and we're going at it from the community up. And again, it's not either or, but I think we can create additional tracks, parallel tracks, that would allow people to quote unquote affiliate or identify with our movement in new and different ways. Yeah.
Where do the Jewish Reagan Republicans fit within our tent?
So you were very specific about which Republicans you want to put in our tent.
I wanted to use that just an example of those who are not so liberal, but are Jewish.
Right. So in
Start
some,
by the second.
yeah. So there's three words in our movement. All three of them are unhelpful. Secular, humanistic, Judaism. So secular, a lot of Jews will just say I'm secular because I drive my Shabbat. I'm not observant. But secular in the larger society means without religion. And that's how we're using it. Humanism is a philosophy of life, of ethics, with the understanding that we have to do it ourselves because there will be no divine intervention. So we can use reason and logic and empathy and human emotion and science to get at ethics instead of relying on what some say was told to us from on high. And Judaism is redefined as a culture in which religion is just a piece. So all of those things are unhelpful, and I think in our communities, we've got folks who are secular humanistic Jews, but we've also got secular Jews and humanistic Jews. And I see my job as serving people who are at least 2 out of 3. And the secular Jews, secular but not humanistic Jews, are folks, he's a leader in one of our small communities. He's from Russia originally, and perhaps that's where he got his admiration for strongman politicians. And he is to the right politically, but he's ardently secular Jewish. And we've got to serve him too, And so for their community, it's not about social justice, it's about community service. And that's how they make the world a better place. And that's okay. And each community gets to decide for themselves. But I will tell you that I think his community is not growing because they can't take positions on what's happening in the world today. And I think we have to take positions on what's happening in the world today. And if we do, we might lose a couple, but we'll get many more people who say, that does speak for me. I'm really unhappy with the breach in the wall between separation of church and state, and we need to stand up on all these issues in which that affects us.
2 different questions. One is sort of curiosity. I heard you in the morning, and I heard you now, and when you mention the holidays, you never mention Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And in our experience, that's when we get most of our calendars, right?
Yeah.
So why is that? Why is that you don't consider them as, it's just, you didn't pick them?
Yeah, well, I've been mentioning Hanukkah and Passover as the holidays that most Jews are still doing because the majority of Jews still do that. I'm not sure the majority of Jews still go to the holidays. It's under 50%, about 40%.
Wow.
And the difference is about community, and that you don't need an organized community to do Hanukkah and Passover, but you do need it for Rosh Hashanah. Nevertheless, 40% of the Jewish community is a lot of people. And if that's when we see the most people, then my question to you, if I was consulting with your board, which I did yesterday, but we didn't touch on this piece of it because this is about outreach, is who are they? How are you learning about them? How are you determining what their needs and interests are? And then how are you following up with them to serve it? It goes back, everything is always going to go back to those questions of what's the meaning and value for them? And how can we help them achieve it? And recognizing that our community is mostly a community of volunteers, perhaps the question is how do we empower them to answer those questions for themselves if humanistic Judaism is they see that as a potential vehicle through which they can answer those questions. So everything, any program any service that we do, I think we should be asking ourselves those kind of questions. What are people getting out of this? How do they feel better leaving than they did coming in? How is it helping people, or how is it making the world a better place? And so I will bring up Chabad, now that you know that I'm not a booster of Chabad, but why do they stop people on the street to ask them to do a Jewish ritual, which they do in New York City? I presume you may have seen this, or they set up sukkahs for Sukkot. For them, the moment is the goal. They once asked me to wrap tefillin in a sukkah. With my wife is standing right there. She doesn't look typically Jewish, Ashkenazic Jewish, but I guess I do. I thought I could pass as Italian, but I guess not. And they invited me in, and I thought my wife might get a kick out of this. So no, it wasn't tefillin. It was shaking a lulav and entrum. So he had me recite the blessings and do the thing, and then that was it. And I felt used. Like, not even a hug after, like, I just felt like all he was there for was that ritual, because in their minds it spreads holiness into the universe. Like, that's what drives them. Now, what I'm saying, the lesson is for secular Jews is, what drives us? What's our mission? It's not that. We know it's not that. But how do we articulate what that is? And this is something that all of the Jewish community can ask themselves on their own. Like, what is the mission of conservative Judaism? They've been having such a tough time articulating that because they're playing such defense on the intermarriage issue. No rabbi is allowed to officiate an intermarriage in the conservative movement, and they've been getting, it's 2018, they've been getting so much slack about this, and I think deservedly so. But on the flip side, they can't articulate why what their mission is, and they fear, I think, that if they then start officiating in intermarriages, or allow some of their rabbis to, then the one thing that differentiates them is gone. But the thing that differentiates them is awful, so they should let it go. But it's like, there's this story, and now I feel terrible quoting Woody Allen, but it was one of his earlier stories that were funny, and it was about this guy who goes to the opera, and he falls out of the balcony pit, and so he goes back the next day and does it again, as if he meant to do it, and he keeps doing it, and he's like, his friend says, you should probably stop now. He's like, no, a few more times, it doesn't hurt that badly. He just keeps falling out of the balcony pit of the opera, to show that, no, we meant to do this. They're shooting themselves in the foot over intermarriage over and over again, and what's going to happen if they let it go? But again, to me, it's like, if that's the genuine religious belief, then my argument is done. Because I can't argue with because God said so. I respect people's beliefs, but that's not the argument that they're making, ever. I've never seen that. I see it from the Orthodox, and that's why I'm not talking about them, because they can make that argument. God said this, this, and this, and therefore we're going to do this, this, and this, and if you don't, you're transgressing. Got it. I'm never going to be a part of that community, but there's a logic there that doesn't exist in the conservative movement, which is holding off on officiating in intermarriages based on lots of other reasons that are frankly disproven, I think, by these numbers.
I have, sorry, the second part, the second question I had was regarding humanism, because I understand you can be secular and not humanist another way, the other way around, but what I think is very interesting for me, maybe because I come from Latin America, and in the 60s and 70s, there was a very important movement called Theology of Liberation, and they were Christian, and they were God believers, and they were one of the best people I ever heard of, because they were caring about poor people, they wanted a better world, they were doing tikkun. So I feel, and especially after in the Trump era, I feel that the humanist part for me is more important right now than the secular part.
Sure.
So I'm willing to be close to people that believe in God, because if they have a good heart, in simple words to say, it's more important. And I didn't feel that way several years ago. I was more secular. And now I realize, especially after Trump, I
Right.
would say so.
I think we've got a really nice range in our community, and what I've been saying when I explain it is that we're a Jewish community where many of us do not believe in God, or do not believe in a God that answers personal prayers. And I think that opens it up to people who think God is love or universal spirit or in all of us or nature. If you actually ask Jews about it, you'll get these kind of answers. And very few of them will say, God is answering, is listening to me, and he's punishing me because I'm a bad person, or. So I think that the piece about, there is it's called religious humanism, but it's that kind of religion. It's not what we're seeing in terms of the notion that God will fix it. We can suck out as much oil as we want from the planet and burn the fossil fuels, and who cares if there's snow in the North Pole or not, because it's only going to speed up the rapture anyway, and that's going to be wonderful. And I think that we can do both. I think we can push back on that, and we can also do the stuff that you're talking about with a broad spectrum of people and beliefs.
Yes, so I was curious by one of the statistics that you were showing. I think is the one that shows the different generations of children from intermarriage with the percentage that considered Jews or not. I think, I think
This one?
Yeah, this one. So I was thinking, I was curious how to interpret this, because first glance it seems like generation-wise, it seems like a positive that you have more people, right, identifying as Jewish as total, right, on the new generations. But I'm not sure that if there is any even statistics that look at this, how each one of those groups are evolving towards time, right? Because I tend to think that the younger generation maybe also because they're closer to the time where they got that Jewish education at home, that probably behave more than the trend. So I'm just curious to see what's happening after a while, if you're trying to use that as a prediction of how what's going to happen with the community, if they're going to keep those Jewish values or not. You understand what I'm trying to say?
Yes, I do, and in fact, I appreciate your statistical mind, because what happens on the flip side is people look at Jewish demographic studies and they look at the percentage of children that are being raised in Orthodox households, and they see that it's something like 18%. I don't know what it was in the DC study, but if in the Pew survey, I think it was all of Orthodoxy was 8% in DC. Pew found 10% nationally, but for children, they found something like 18%. So the logical conclusion that a lot of people made, including demographers who should know better, was, well, as these kids grow up, it means the Orthodox will be a much larger percentage of the Jewish community. But they're not looking at the same numbers in the Pew survey that show no denomination has more outflow than the Orthodox, and conservative Judaism also. And with all of that denominational switching, you can't say that. So I appreciate that you're applying it to this, but this is an age cohort of 18 to 29, and 18 to 29 is already almost fully formed.
Right.
And you know the joke about when does Judaism consider the fetus to be viable?
Yes.
You know the joke, when it has a master's degree?
No. What has an MD degree?
Yeah, the bottom line is, though, if you look at all of the age cohorts, it disproves the statement that the intermarried won't raise their kids Jewish. It flips it, because even if you look at comparing 50 to 64 to 65 and up, there was more than a doubling, or in that same age cohort, 30 to 64. And so, you're right, I'm being optimistic, but what I think happened here was an intervention by the Jewish community to say, we're not going to pull a tevya on you, we're going to welcome you, at least in some ways, we're going to have some rabbis who will officiate at your wedding, maybe, and you can call yourself Jewish if you want to. But you're right, time will tell. I don't know how long we were supposed to go. Maybe
Tell
I'll
us
take
though,
one more
what do you
question.
want us to say when they call up on the phone and say, are you Jews by religion? Just so that we can get counted.
Say yes.
We
You are
say-
Jewish by religion.
We say yes,
Yes.
a lot of our members refuse to say it because
That's
they think
okay.
it's on principle.
The way we're gonna answer, the way we're gonna increase how many secular Jews are measured by these studies is to increase the number of secular humanistic Jews. It's on us, right? Some studies don't count the Reconstructionist movement, and some studies do. I don't know if it's like a threshold. In San Francisco, they were 2%. It means we're not measuring it at 2%, and we should, and we're working on it.
But the
You know,
answer is yes.
just saying, I would say, well, you answer your truth.
No, no, no.
My truth is I'm Jewish by religion. My denomination is secular humanistic Judaism. That's a non-theistic religion, but it's a religion. But even without all of that, even years ago, before I was comfortable calling myself a humanistic Jew, I would still say, yeah, because I know where this is going, and I would want to be counted. One more question, and then we'll wrap up. Yes. Did anyone not get a chance? Okay.
I mean, I work in kind of research and evaluation, and most good evaluations include quantitative and qualitative data. And I'm a little concerned, I'm not sure what kind of research is out there. What has been presented is all quantitative, so that we're trying to like kind of guess, well, what does it mean that the 18 to 29-year-olds are more likely to be Jews by religion? And have there been studies where they've gone in and done like extensive interviews and focus groups to try to interpret what all these mean?
Absolutely. And not a whole lot, but there have been, and it's pretty fascinating, and it kind of supports what I've been saying. So my former organization, we did a qualitative study of the adult children of intermarriage, so that exact age cohort, 18 to 29, in 3 different communities. We did extensive interviews with about 90 participants, and I can send that to you. One of the interesting findings was that kids who are bar and bat mitzvah have a much higher probability of calling themselves Jewish than those who weren't. That the actual bar mitzvah itself, and in thinking about what that might mean, to me, it's about standing up in front of your friends and family and declaring yourself Jewish. There was another study that found that children will grow up considering themselves Jewish at higher rates if their parents tell them that they're Jewish. So what's happening in a lot of these families is that they're just not telling the kid, you're this and you're that. I mean, I'm constantly talking to my 5-year-old about being Jewish and about being Japanese, and we're reading a book about George Washington, and he's gonna have these at least 3 kind of cultural heritages, and it seems so obvious that if they just grow up saying I'm Jewish, that a piece of that will stay with them. And then they get to decide, of course, when they're adults, whether they want to stick with that or not. But the funny thing about that is, if that's really all it takes, then you don't need community at all. You just need to keep telling your kid every morning, brush your teeth and you're Jewish. And then they'll have a Jewish identity, right? If the whole goal is how many Jews show up on a Pew survey, then that's kind of silly. It's got to, again, have meaning and relevance to them. But it was just this really interesting finding that you just need to talk about it with them, and it makes sense because it's just like anything else in life, that if you talk about it with them, they're going to have a better ability to handle it. And certainly in my family, at some point, I'm going to talk about matrilineal and patrilineal descent several years from now, but I'll let them know, because what happens is kids growing up in the Reform movement today are not taught about that. And then they go into pluralistic settings, either Hillel on campus or Birthright Israel, and some smart thinking conservative Jews finds out that their mother isn't Jewish and uses the one piece of Jewish knowledge that they think they know, which is, oh, if your mom's not Jewish, then. And Rabbi Angela Buchdahl, who is the senior rabbi of Central Synagogue in Manhattan, which as a synagogue has more people in it than our movement, and has a waiting list. You can't become a member there even if you want to, because they've got a waiting. So she's the senior rabbi there. Her mom is Korean, and she had that experience in Israel, and it the direction it pushed her was an Orthodox conversion, Reform ordination. Okay, but it was a major influence in her life. And what's remarkable to me, I mean, off the record, she then would not officiate at intermarriage initially in the beginning of her rabbinate and came to it. So she's on video talking about how she came to begin officiating at intermarriage. That just shows how deeply ingrained this notion is about intermarriage being counter to what Judaism is. And it's so different than how the Jews are living. And to me, it really embodies what the challenge is for the organized Jewish community to still get past it when so many of the actual Jews are long over that particular piece of it. So thank you so much for coming.